Chapter 16. Marian's feet felt heavy as she trudged down the road back towards the castle. It was late, but luckily the moonlight provided plenty of illumination. She wondered if anyone had noticed she'd been gone. Well, besides Cluck, of course. The chicken was panicked at this point, wondering what had happened to her. And the worst part was, it had been for nothing. She should never have left her chambers for all the good it had done her. Oh, Robin, this was not how I imagined it would go between us. For 3 long years she had pictured their reunion, the first time they'd see each other after the war. In her mind, it had always been a joyful event, filled with laughter and jokes and lots of hugging. Best friends, together at last, never to part again. But nothing could have been farther from the reality. Suddenly she heard a rumbling behind her. She whirled around, surprised to see a familiar coach headed down the road, drawn by 2 elephants and escorted by 4 rhino guards. It was the same coach with the lion crest on its side that the sheriff had used to pick her up from the docks. Prince John's coach. Marian slipped behind a nearby tree, her pulse pounding at her throat. Should she run? Stay hidden? The carriage was coming closer, and she decided it would be better to remain where she was, rather than risk attracting attention by making a move. She tried to peer into the window to determine who was inside. Oh, sorry, Quinn. Was it the sheriff? Come back from a nightly tax run? Or maybe Prince John himself? Sir Hiss? What were they doing out there so late at night? Could they possibly be searching for her? The thought made her stomach sink. What would they do if they caught her out there? Would they lock her back in her room? Or worse? The carriage rolled closer and the window came into view. She caught a flash of gold, Prince John's crown, sitting crookedly on the lion's head. He was dressed for an occasion, draped in his royal robes, but looked a little sleepy, his thumb firmly planted in his mouth. Beside him sat Sir Hiss, who looked much more awake. As Marian watched, the snake slithered out of the coach's window to bark orders at the elephants, telling them to hurry up. Could you possibly go any slower? The snake demanded. It's past His Royal Majesty's bedtime. Chop, chop. Marian could imagine that if the snake had paws, he'd be clapping them along with the orders. The elephants sighed but dutifully picked up the pace. Meanwhile, Marian let out a breath of relief. So they weren't out looking for her. That was good. And if they had been out all night visiting, then they probably hadn't even noticed she was gone. She had only to wait for the carriage to pass, and then she could be on her way. But just as they were about to pass her, one of the elephants, in his haste, tripped over a fallen branch he hadn't seen in the darkness. He lurched forwards, his top half before his bottom, causing the carriage to tip dangerously to one side. The other elephant tried to help by leaning the other way, but the carriage was too heavy for him to take its entire weight on his back, and it toppled over, crashing onto the forest floor with a loud bang. Marian watched, both horrified and fascinated, as the elephants tried to untangle themselves from the coach. Inside, she could hear Prince John bellowing with rage, which made her giggle a little. Meanwhile, Sir Hiss slid out the window and began scolding the elephants. You clots, he cried. How dare you upset His Royal Majesty? Help! Cried Prince John. His voice sounded muffled, and Marian guessed he was still sucking his thumb. Help me, I say. Your king commands it. The rhino guards ran to assist, needing to get the elephants back on their feet before they could work to right the coach, which wasn't easy, considering each elephant had to have weighed a ton. Marian watched, not able to help a small smile, as they started arguing with one another, which only made things worse. She knew she should slip away, take advantage of everyone's being distracted. She could beat them back to the castle, slip through the secret passageway, and return to her rooms before anyone was wiser. But just as she was about to make her move, her eyes fell on something lying on the ground at the back of the carriage. Gold. The carriage, it seemed, had been carrying a large chest of gold positioned on its rear platform. When the carriage had toppled over, the chest had popped open, and the gold had spilled out onto the ground. No one appeared to have noticed this yet. They were all too busy up front, dealing with the elephants. Marian wondered what Prince John would do if he knew his precious treasure was just lying in the road, ripening for the taking. The taking? Suddenly, a thought struck her. A wild thought, a dangerous thought, a thought that she definitely shouldn't have been thinking. Yet it seemed to lodge in her brain, and she found she couldn't shake it free. The gold was just sitting there after all. It would be so simple. Slip out onto the road and fill her cloak with gold when no one was looking. Then go straight to the village and give it back to those from whom it had been stolen. For it had been stolen, she reminded herself, under the guise of taxes. This gold belonged to the animals, and the animals needed it far more than Prince John did. Granted, it wasn't going to right all the wrongs in the land. Gold would go only so far. It couldn't change laws or free those who had been in prison, but it could provide some relief in the meantime, while she worked to come up with more permanent changes. It could buy food, medicine, fill empty bellies, cure those who were sick. It could save lives. Her eyes turned back to the commotion at the front of the carriage. The rhinos had managed to help the first elephant back to his feet, and were aiding the second. Prince John had somehow managed to crawl out of the carriage and was ordering everyone around, which was just causing more confusion. Everyone was occupied. No one was looking. If she was going to do this, she needed to do it now. For a moment, she almost reconsidered it. If she was caught, she knew there would be no second chance. She'd be deemed a traitor like Robin, and a thief. She'd lose all her privilege and be thrown into prison, and probably never be let out, which meant any opportunity to help the kingdom would be gone forever. Maybe she should play it safe, bide her time, find another way. But then little Tagalon's face rose to her mind, her big hungry eyes, and Marian knew her choice had already been made. After pulling Robin's cap low over her face, she snuck out from behind the tree and tiptoed towards the pile of spilled gold. When she reached it, she started scooping up as much as she could, as fast as she could do it, using Robin's cloak as a basket. Her heart was pounding, and she barely allowed herself to breathe. Any moment someone could turn around and see her, and then she'd have to run. She'd almost finished when she heard a sudden voice above her. "What's going on here? Who are you? What are you doing?" She jerked her head up to find Sir Hiss peering through the back carriage window, his beady eyes squinting in her direction. Startled, she yelped in alarm, leaping backwards and managing to trip over a stone. The grip on her cloak loosened on a few gold coins clattered to the ground. The snake's eyes bulged from his head. "Guards! Guards!" he cried. "Come quick! We're being robbed!"